What's good, guys? So Ubisoft put out their fiscal 2024-2025 report yesterday, and a lot has been going on about what this means, particularly to the sales of AC Shadows, which is something that a lot of people are actually trying to figure out right now. A lot surrounding the cultural debate, and I think there are bad faith players on both sides of that. A lot of people are saying, well, no, AC Shadows did well. It's just that everything else this year did so bad that it couldn't, essentially save the year for Ubisoft. While other people look at it and go, there's no way that AC Shadows did well, being their biggest release this year. And that still got the reaction that it got from the stock market. So before we get into what the actual report says, we have basically, this was the reaction yesterday by the stock market. It was about a 20% drop. Now it's recovered a little bit of that today, but I mean, it's recovered it and then given a good portion of that back up. It's not much materially different than it was yesterday. Now, a lot of people will say, well, this is a reaction to the bad news of the whole year. I would say respectfully, that's not how the stock market works. I think you can look at the course of the 5 years of Ubisoft, right, where it's peaked here in, I think, 2021, but I think it might have even, if you go back further, I think, yeah, it had a bigger peak even in 2018. But if you look at this 5-year thing, right, like this doesn't only move when we get fiscal reports. And a lot of people saying, well, not AC Shadows, but Star Wars Outlaws didn't do well. They had the whole 10-cent debacle where they had to essentially be bailed out and split the company into two to bundle their largest IPs in with this now partially 10-cent owned entity. But I would say that's kind of factored in, right? Like, if you take 6-month-old news, the stock market doesn't wait until you have an official report from the company to react to bad news. Like, so the idea that this is all just because of the bad news that we've known about for the past 6 months and that AC Shadows just couldn't offset all of that bad news, I think is a bit preposterous. The market doesn't work like that, and I don't think anybody could make a good faith argument that it does. But anyways, I just wanted to set all the stage for that, to talk about what was actually in the report. So let's go here and kind of talk about what we got. IFRS sales. Within IFRS, I had to look it up, is essentially just the standard by which these reports are put out there. I guess when you have stockholders, you have to have a third-party arbiter to make sure that the information is qualitatively accurate to what legally has to be put out there. So anyways, IFRS sales down 17.5%, net bookings down 20.5%. Digital net bookings 20.2%, which, I mean, that's basically the same. I mean, basically all that's saying is there's not a huge difference between the drop off of physical and digital versus just the drop off of digital. Back catalog did drop 13.5%. Now, I will say that's a contributing factor in all of this bad news, but stand to reason this is, no mistake about it, all bad news. Now let's go in and specifically address what they talked about with AC Shadows. Now, before we go any further, I've looked through this and I cannot find anything talking about Star Wars Outlaws. So if you want to know how hard that game bombed, they don't necessarily even want to bring it up when they're talking about their new releases. Granted, I would say that that's kind of old news and everybody knows that game did not perform well, but it just struck me as interesting that they didn't even want to talk about it. And this here, it says Assassin's Creed Shadows launched on March 20th, delivering the second highest day one sales revenue in franchise history. Now, that anybody who is now defending this online, that is the one stat that they are hanging their hat on, right? Like, the only game it didn't outsell day one was Valhalla. That's it. Game's a success. You guys are just, you're haters. You're trying to drag it down. There's no credibility to the fact that the game may have not maintained that trajectory because, day two highest sales. So there you go. I think there's reasons to question if that trajectory was maintained outside of, just the first day. Anyways, second only to Assassin's Creed Valhalla and setting a new record for Ubisoft's day one performance on PlayStation Digital Store. Again, all of this talking about day one. Like, I don't understand. Like, day one, yes, is your most important day, but it's literally only day one, right? Like, if you go and look at the tailed off sales of an Assassin's Creed Origins or Odyssey or any of those, I guarantee you the majority, it might have been their biggest day, but it probably did not account for the majority of their overall sales. Anyways, setting a new record for Ubisoft's day one performance on the PlayStation Digital Store. Player sentiment has been overwhelmingly positive. Player sentiment? Critic sentiment? Okay. I'll grant you that. We definitely have an issue with the viability and the trustability of critic sentiment in the industry right now. Player sentiment, and I'm not sitting here saying you have no positive players, but then like you put this average score of 91 out of 100 across, you know, first party stores, whatever. You're trying to basically generalize player sentiment, which I don't think there's really a reasonable claim to make that. Like, I don't really think that's saying anything that's certifiable in any way, but hey, I digress. I guess you are trying to put out the best news possible to investors. That's literally the whole purpose of this thing. First party stores reflecting the game's excellent quality. To date, consumer spending has clearly outperformed Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Okay, yeah, I will buy that because there's a lot of factors that go into that. I think the fact that it's a day one release on Steam, the fact that Ubisoft Plus, the streaming place to access this game, created a lower barrier to entry that did not exist when Assassin's Creed Odyssey launched. If you want to tell me that it's revenue-wise exceeded AC Odyssey on day one, or even to date, okay, I will grant that, but I do think there's a lot of advantages that really give that an advantage revenue-wise, but we're not done comparing Shadows and Odyssey. That's going to come up here in a little bit because we do have to talk about some of the things that would lead us to question if it's really maintained the trajectory that they're arguing. But anyways, let's get on with the rest of it. 91 out of 100 first-party stores reflecting the game's excellent quality. To date, consumer spending has clearly outperformed Assassin's Creed Odyssey, with the player count also outperforming. Okay, we're going to come back to that in a little bit. The game's performance reaffirms strength and resilience of the Assassin's Creed brand, backed by a strong community response that highlights that the team delivered an experience that resonates with longtime fans and with new players. Like, okay, there's a lot of spin going on in this. All right. Assassin's Creed Shadows is also the first installment built in Ubisoft's significantly upgraded Anvil property engine, with a new benchmark for both industry and Ubisoft's future releases. Since launch, the game has received updates. Okay, basically what they're trying to claim is second only to AC Odyssey. I will grant them that, but I think there's a lot of context that is left out of that statement. And also, I think a lot of what is put here is really just positive spin. 160 million hours. I don't know. I'd have to look into how many hours are logged into games. I don't know that that's all that great. I would think there are probably, I'm guessing Kingdom Comes Deliverance 2 probably has more than 160 million hours across all platforms for player investment. But whatever, 160 million. But here's the thing that we have. We got to look at. All right, so hold on a second. This is basically a chronological chain of their release. Okay, so we have to look, if we're going to look at year over year, we have to look at what they released this year versus what they released last year. So AC Shadows, obviously their newest game. There's Just Dance, Monopoly, Anyo 117, Star Wars Outlaws, The Rogue, Prince of Persia, which I think might be a VR title. So if we look just at these, these 6 titles, right? I think your big releases here were Star Wars Outlaws and AC Shadows. I think that's reasonable. I think you could probably look at those 2 titles out of these 6 titles. You might say there's a lot of Just Dance people out there. Still, I guess I can't verify that, but I know that Just Dance was big at one point in time. So two, maybe three titles that you could argue that were good. Okay, we know this one bombed. We don't know about this one. We don't know about this one, and this one's kind of debatable as to what it all meant. All right, so let's go into 2023-2024 fiscal year. If you don't know, fiscal year ends March 31st, begins April 1st. So we're not literally talking about 2024. We're talking about, you know, games that released in winter of 2024 all the way through most of spring of 2024. Well, not most of spring, but a chunk of spring. So first off, we have Skull and Bones, a game that we do know bombed. So like this factors in over the year prior. Prince of Persia, another game that we know has bombed. Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, this would probably be one of their bigger titles for last year, and I think I looked at the year to date. I think they estimate this have sold somewhere between 2.5 and 3 million, so it's not a bad title, but it's certainly not a massive seller. AC Mirage probably would be their biggest title, so let's see. Okay, AC Mirage sales has sold over 5 million copies as of January, so let's say that this is probably 1 million or 2 behind, but let's say 5 million for sake of argument here. Okay, the Crew Motorfest, I wouldn't call that one of their big titles for sure. Let's see here. This released. Why do they not have the release date there? They do for these other ones. Okay, this was September 11th, 2023. So this is what, fall. Valiant Hearts. I think that's a smaller indie game. January 27th, 2023. So this would be in the 2023-2022 year. We don't have super good information on this because they don't have the release date here. So let's say the Crew Motorfest and assume that this one released in the previous fiscal year. So essentially what we can derive from this past year is maybe, I think it's under 1 million sales on Prince of Persia. I don't know what Skull and Bones did. Let's take a quick look at that. Let's see, sales number. I don't know if we'll get a good estimate. 850,000 players. I don't know if we ever really get. I don't know we have a great estimate on Skull and Bone sales. But I would think if the game had done well, we would have that number, right? So the two that we can get here are Avatar and Assassin's Creed Mirage. Now those two together have probably given you what, let's say 8 million. I mean, I think that's a reasonable for, you know, what, mind you, it's not year to date over, like we're not counting the amount of sales these titles have generated in this current fiscal year that was just reported on. We're talking about just sales that happened in the year that their report would have been released. Let's say 8 million, and I think we're being generous with that. Okay. This is not a huge year for Ubisoft. So when we come back and we look at this and we're down the better part of 20% over last year, I don't see how you could look at Shadows and think that it did super well. Like I've seen the report that it sold 3 million, but Ubisoft was asked in the earnings call for this how much it sold, and they declined to answer. And when you're talking to the people who are going to determine the value of your company, the idea that you're going to decline to give them good news is kind of preposterous. So if AC Shadows was the success that it's been chalked up to be by a lot of people online, Ubisoft would have been willing to share that information because it would have only been beneficial to them. Now, there is one thing that I will say that does factor into this that we do need to discuss, because one thing that had come out, and I don't know that it was necessarily, I think it was part of their earnings report, And I think it's actually something that's being glossed over when it's probably the biggest part of this drop. I'm not sitting here saying that AC Shadows bombed or succeeded. I think it's probably, the truth is probably somewhere in between. I think it's probably sold a couple million units, but nowhere near the amount that it would need to actually make its money back. What its trajectory looks like long term, I don't think that the game has the same tail as an AC Odyssey or an AC Origins or a Valhalla. Time will tell on that, but I think when you look at the long-term tail of a game, player sentiment matters a lot, and Shadows clearly doesn't have the sentiment that the other modern day AC Assassin's Creed games has. But we do have to talk about one other big thing, and it's possibly the biggest thing, was we also got the news in this report somewhere, and I myself did not do the greatest at looking through all this because I read it last night, but they said during this that they are delaying all of their major titles. Now, we've had game delays in the past, right? A game that gets announced and it's not, it's not meeting the development that it needs to be. It's not progressing at the rate that it needs to be. And so it gets delayed. That's not uncommon in the industry, right? The problem here is they delayed an undisclosed amount of games. I think the estimate is 3, but we really don't know how many games they delayed. And they've delayed all games that we currently do not officially know about. You don't do that because of just simply put a game's not keeping pace with its development cycle, right? You don't delay multiple projects at the same time that have yet been undisclosed to the public if all is well and good. And so when we look at AC Shadows and we sit here and say, well, what did it do? Well, whatever it did caused the company to hit the pause on everything they're doing, everything meaningful that they're doing. I don't sit here and claim that I know what went on with the game, but I do claim that you don't hit pause on every major title to the point where they don't have much coming out in 2026, where I think a lot of the reason for this dip is because there's no reasonable expectation from investors that there will be much in the way of actual product to push over the next fiscal year, and that's not an unreasonable expectation. But you have to remember, the pause was hit partially because of the reception to Outlaws and Shadows. So it stands to reason they are probably combing over all of the major titles that they're currently working on and making sure that whatever problems they interpreted from those things or from the reception to those games is they're getting whatever they determined those problems to be probably out of those games. You don't hit pause across the board on a bunch of titles that you haven't even told people about yet, right? I have never heard of a publisher pausing all of its stuff at the same time. And that is literally what Ubisoft said. Now, we sit here and we talk about what AC Shadows did, and we talk about how that it's dealing better than Odyssey, and it's producing more than Odyssey, and it's got more revenue than Odyssey, and it's more engaged than Odyssey. Right now on Steam, players right now, 4,342 on Odyssey, 5,693 24-hour peak. Okay, not great numbers, but we are talking about a game that came out in 2018. Game that came out much more recently was Shadows. 4,170 players right now, 4,820 24-hour peak. If you want to sit here and tell me that there isn't a drop in interest and probably a subsequent significant tailing off in revenue, these numbers don't speak to a title that is keeping up with an 18-year, with a game that came out in 2018, right? To keeping up with a 6-year-old game. These numbers, listen, I realize that SteamDB is not the be all end all, But the mere fact that these numbers are not keeping up with these numbers speaks to the fact that whatever success AC Shadows had, there's reason to believe that it was short-lived, particularly in a world where Ubisoft is hitting the pause on absolutely everything that they're doing, again, across the board, which is an unprecedented move that I feel like the entire internet is kind of just glossing over right now. Anyways, guys, that's going to do it for this one today. Let me know what y'all think down in the comments. I think it's pretty crazy. And my issue with this is not the culture war per se, but the fact that we cannot get to a point where we can even debate the realities of the situation, where we can't look at the numbers that we do have available to us and at least agree when things aren't doing well. Like, we have to fight about that, even though like there's a lot of mental gymnastics done to get to places where you think all of the evidence supports AC Shadows doing well. And if we can't get to the point of that debate, it doesn't stand to reason that the industry is going to do what it needs to do to change course. And I think a lot of what you're seeing out of the access media types that you will see on social media is a lot of digging in your heels, no matter how bad the situation is. I don't know that Ubisoft is necessarily taking that approach, right? Because you're not hitting the pause button when all is good and well. So clearly the corporations that have to deal with the bottom lines of these positions are not quite as happy with the result. But again, the access media types arguing in favor of this are the same access media types who are friends with the development studios and friends with the people who make these games. That's why they're access media types, because having the positions they have allows them to still have access to those people. So we're now reaching a point, I think, where you can start to take evidence that the publishers and the developers' interests are moving in opposite directions. And I think that's we can sort of derive some interesting information from this and kind of take it forward. Anyways, that's going to do it for this one. Let me know what y'all think down in the comments. We'll catch you on the next one. Until then, guys, get awesome.